I'm partnering once again with DraftKings Casino to bring you one of their biggest fan-favorite games, Huff and More Puff. If you haven't played yet, you're really missing out. This game is packed with flying pigs, massive winds, and the iconic wolf who's always ready to blow the house down. New players, here's the deal. Get 500 total spins on Huff and More Puff when you play just $5. That's 50 spins per day for 10 days, plus a first day replay up to 1,000 in casino credits. If DraftKings Casino isn't available in your state, you can still jump into the action with DraftKings Daily Fantasy for a shot at winning real cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Casino app now, sign up with my promo code beingscared, and start spinning today. The crown is yours. Hey, welcome to Scary Stories for a Rainy Night. If you have trouble relaxing or sleeping, this might be just what you need. Or if you're like so many others and just love scary stories with the sound of falling rain, these videos are for you as well. So make sure you subscribe, join my family, and hit the like button if you enjoy this video. Please don't forget that there are minimal ads in all my videos towards the beginning, so that you can relax or sleep without being interrupted. As always, thank you for being here, when I know you have so many other options. Now, let's begin. My brother used to repeat this mantra to me when we were just children. My mother died of a horrible illness when we were young, and it did not take long after that for my father to become distant. Really, growing up, me and my brother only used to have each other. I remember being so young. After my mother left us, everything seemed so scary. During thunderstorms, on the nights where the wind and the rain would seem to take on an entirely different form, my imagination would, as young imaginations do, run away with itself. My father was no longer able to offer any kind of reassurance, so naturally, I would seek shelter in my big brother's room. "Don't worry," he would whisper as I sank into bed with him, pulling the covers close to my face in an effort to shield from the creeping darkness of the storm. "Just count to 10, Nancy." Since then, even now, I am on the cusp of 20. His words have still lingered on. I am unashamed to say that I have counted to 10 many times in the subsequent years since then, and every time I do, I still feel like that small, scared little child hiding from the rain. The night it happened was no different. My father did not last long. The years following my mother's passing were nothing more than a massive binge for him. He began to indulge heavily in alcohol, far too heavily. The day that his liver finally decided that it had enough was the same day that he called us into the hospital to see him. "Josh, Nancy," he spoke softly, "the house will be yours." That was the only fatherly thing my father ever did for us. A few days later, he was gone. Now, I'm 19. My brother and I have lived happily ever after since. After the house passed to us, we no longer had the worry of a roof or a shelter. We managed to sustain ourselves, our jobs paying for all the small amenities that our lives would inevitably require. One day my brother bought me a small pocket knife. It was a small blade, its handle nondescript, but the blade adequately sharp. "I cannot be with you all the time," he told me, handing me the small object. "And I need to know that you're safe, even when I'm not there with you." Although I was no longer that scared little girl, running from noises and flashes of lightning, it still felt comforting to know that my big brother was still my protector, that he was still my light in the darkness, my night. The evening it all happened was like any other. It was a Friday, and my brother would be away overnight for a party. I would have the house to myself, and I have to admit that after a hectic week at work, I was looking forward to nothing more than a glass of wine, quiet solitude, and of course, a nice hot bath. I had already poured the glass, and it sat waiting patiently for me on the sink next to the tub. I moved through the house, latching closed the front door on my way to grabbing a fresh towel. I quickly retrieved one, and a few minutes later, I had undressed and had already sunk back into the warm, inviting waters. An unmeasurable amount of time passed, my mind blank, and my body relaxed. The wine went down smoothly as the tension from the week gradually drifted from my body, escaping into the warm waters around me. The candles I had lit aided in my relaxation, their flames flickering slightly within the darkness of the room. My phone had been vibrating for a while now, but I had barely noticed it as the calming sensations had claimed my mind. It vibrated straight through the call before I even had the chance to sit up and retrieve it from the shelf in front of me. I picked up the handset with wet hands, and the screen lit up in response. It was Josh. Just as I was about to return his call, a noise claimed my attention. It was small, a distant rumble originating from somewhere out in the emptiness. It was thunder. It roared quietly in the distance at first, obviously originating from a few miles away. It did not take long, however, for it to close the distance to my home, and before I knew it, Mother Nature roared loudly above my head. In an instant, I felt like that small girl once more, alone in the darkness, lost without hope. I felt my heart quicken as the irrational fear took over. "It's just a storm," I said aloud, my words sounding less than convincing. "It'll pass." After a few moments, I realized that my anxiety was not lowering. My bath time was clearly over. Fate had decided that my relaxation had obviously come to an end. Defeated, I climbed from the bath, dried my body, and quickly redressed. As I opened the door to the bathroom, I quickly realized that my home was not exactly as I had left it. All of the lights which I had left on before entering were now switched off. The hallway was pitch black, and the darkness seemed to cling to every wall. I felt my heart once again quicken in pace as a surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. What the hell? The air outside was thick and foreboding as reality set in. The house was now wrapped in a blanket of darkness, and I was alone, with nothing but the silence and my own labored breath for company. "It's just the fuses," I managed to think through the haze of fear. "Grab a candle and check downstairs." It was a simple thought on the surface, a simple task that would require a simple touch, but simplicity had long escaped me, displaced somewhere amongst the shadows which had managed to infect every wall. Somehow, I managed to will my legs to return me to the bathroom, where I retrieved a candle, bringing its delicate light back out with me into the cold blackness outside. The candle performed amicably. It partially lit my way as I moved towards the staircase. However, it proved a little too efficient, as it beautifully lit the mudded footprints on the top step. I instantly froze. For a second, I struggled to comprehend the image. Dumbfounded, I turned, following their path to their place of origin. They seemed to originate from my room, before leading into the hallway and finally down the steps before me. As I glanced down the incline of the stairway, down into the darkness which lay beneath, the horrid truth slowly dawned on me. Someone was in the house. My body began to tremble as the realization set in. Someone was here. They were downstairs, and I was completely alone with them, trapped in a locked house with no means of escape. The air felt thick and rancid as I struggled to maintain my composure. What do I do? My phone would have been the most logical step, but logic has a way of betraying you when you are presented with a situation so utterly terrifying. It would have been sensible to move back into the bathroom, to lock the door, and to call Josh for help, but sensibility is the first commodity to betray you during a storm. Without cause and without reason, my mind remembered the pocket knife. I knew where it was. It was not far. I had kept it close, just as my brother had asked of me. It was in the drawer on my bedside table, carefully stored there since the day that Josh had bought it for me. I could get to it. I was close. I had to be quiet. Thunder clapped loudly outside of the window. Although it was deafening, it barely concealed the sound of movement coming from the floor below. An intruder was definitely down there, creeping around in the shadows, waiting. Softly, my feet began to move, guiding me quietly into my room and toward the drawer. As I moved, I noticed the open window in my bedroom, the wind gushing through, drawing my attention to the point of entry. My brain barely registered this fact as I carefully opened the drawer and retrieved the knife which lay within. Slowly, I pushed the wood back into the table and crept back into the silent, black hallway outside. As I did, another sound of movement below claimed my attention. There was shuffling. Someone was definitely moving downstairs, and very carefully by the sounds of it. I quickly realized that this was a burglary. The lights had clearly gone out, and someone must have mistaken my property for an empty home. The reasons for the intrusion, however, no longer mattered. I was in danger, and I had to act in order to protect myself. I carefully unfolded the blade on the knife as my bare feet made contact with the cold, wooden stairs. There are no words that can be used accurately to describe the pure terror which ensnared my mind. With each step, the fear grew. It coursed through the vessels woven throughout my body, boiling my blood and burning my soul. The knife shook in my hand as my mind drifted back to those nights so long ago when I would seek the comfort and protection of my bigger brother. Just like those nights, and just like all of the years which came after, I began to count. 1. I carefully took another step down. 2. More steps. He's there, waiting for me. 3. I slowly lowered myself down another step. 4. A flash of lightning illuminated the figure below. 5. My heart threatens to burst from my chest. 6. My hands are shaking violently. 7. I am almost at the bottom. 8. He's hunched in the corner. Do something. 9. He has his back to me. I have to act. 10. The blade sinks into the back of his neck with little effort. The blood was instant. It gushed forcefully from the gap in the wound, shooting straight from the fine space in between the gash and the blade, which remained stuck in place inside of the intruder's neck. I instinctively moved backwards as the assailant began to thrash around in surprise, knocking several objects from their resting place and smashing a vase, which once sat precariously on a nearby shelf. My mind became numb as the scene unfolded before me. He moved around the room for a few seconds, desperately seeking for a surface to cling to, for an object to steady himself with, but he found none. After a few more moments of flailing, he collapsed heavily onto the floor, face up and eyes wide. Whole body shaking, I instinctively stepped towards him, a blot of lightning illuminating the room as I neared his final resting place. As the sharp shot of light filled the room, my heart sank as a tear fell heavily from my eye. I was worried. My brother gurgled through the thick blood, which had begun to ooze from the newly gaping wound. I came home. He continued to gasp on for a few more moments, as the sound of him choking on his own blood filled the small confines of the room. He sputtered and he fought, his breathing becoming strained and quick as he desperately sucked at each last breath, until finally he took his last. His chest ceased to rise, but his eyes remained open, locked permanently agape on his last horrifying moments. And all I did was look on, my actions misplaced, and the consequences almost too much to bear. As I watched on as the last remaining light extinguished from my life, I knew that I would be forever alone, and the realization was one of absolute, soul-wrenching terror. A lengthy investigation followed that night. The police were sympathetic, and they eventually understood the circumstances surrounding Josh's death. Ultimately, it was labeled as an accident. They went on to explain that his friends had verified that at the party, he had expressed concern for me being at home alone, and had diligently decided to leave early. Upon returning home, he could not gain entry as I had latched the front door closed. He did try to call me, as shown by the call log stored on his phone, but I had not answered. Once the storm had begun, he had drunkenly decided to gain entry into our home by climbing the terrace just outside of my room, as he knew that I always left my window unlatched. The power being out had just been a cruel twist of fate, as it was decided that he must have been trying to fix the issue at the moment I had mistaken him for an intruder. It was then that I knew. At that moment, I killed him. At the moment I had robbed my protective big brother of his life, that he was still trying to be my knight. He knew that the darkness still haunted me, even though I pretended it did not. He knew that the storm would still get under my skin. That night he just wanted to protect me, and for all his nobility, he no longer lives. The storm does not scare me anymore. I have seen something much darker. Since that night, when Mother Nature emerges from her slumber and the wind and the rain threaten to invade the confines of my home, I barely flinch. For in that moment, and every night since, I see his face. I relive his final gasps. I am imprisoned by his fixed and open eyes. In those moments of solitude, where I am trapped by my actions and encased with regret, I simply begin to count, but I can never get to 10. I used to live in a haunted house. When most people hear me say that, they chuckle and don't usually believe me, but I had seen undeniable proof of the ghost that inhabits my home. In fact, on a few occasions, I had seen him with my own eyes. Typically, when people think of haunted houses, they think of old, dusty, two-story homes that were built on Native American burial grounds or was the place of a death years prior. I can tell you now, neither of those is the case when it comes to my home. My grandfather built this house after he married my grandmother, and it's been in my family ever since. After my grandparents died, it was inherited by my father, and after he and my mother passed, it came to me. You might be thinking that Pat must be the ghost of my grandfather or father, but no, that's wrong too. He's been around ever since my grandfather completed construction. It wasn't like he was there during the process of building the house either. Pat literally showed up the day after all of the work was said and done. Obviously, this initially freaked my grandparents out. Nothing malicious ever happened though, just some sounds of footsteps, the occasional sounds of the doors opening and closing, and the drop of temperature in whatever room Pat was in at the time. The thought of a ghost being in their home, however, just didn't sit right with them at first. They tried everything they could to banish him. They called in priests and even an exorcist, but nothing ever worked. After many attempts, they had contemplated selling the house and moving away, but my grandfather just wouldn't accept that. He had built that house with his own 2 hands, and that pride wouldn't allow him to abandon it. Eventually, my grandparents learned to live with Pat. As I said, he was never malicious or did anything to cause harm. He was just there. After my grandparents died, my father thought that their ghosts would linger around the house as well, but that never happened. Pat was the only entity around, and it would stay that way. My father tried to learn more about Pat by researching the area where we lived, but never found any credible results. It was as if Pat just materialized out of nowhere once the house was finished. One time when I was a teenager, a group of friends came over, and we tried to communicate with Pat through a Ouija board. My parents had strictly forbidden this, so of course, being the teenage dumbass that I was, I decided to do it anyway, behind their back. This is usually the part of the story where all kinds of hell would break loose because of the Ouija board, but that didn't happen. After many unsuccessful attempts to contact him, Pat finally showed himself to us. His body was faint, and we couldn't make out any real features other than the shape of his body. He looked to be about my height and weight, had short hair, black dress pants, and a white dress shirt. "Hi, Pat," I said in a quiet voice. He stood there and gave me a confused look, and then slightly smirked, closed his eyes, and lifted his arm in a wave. I continued, "Pat's probably not your name, right?" He shook his head, keeping the smirk on his face. I continued on. "Well, can you tell me your name?" The smirk left his face and was replaced by a sad look. He looked down to the floor and then to me, and shook his head again. I had guessed that he must not be able to speak, which made sense, seeing as there had never been any moans or wails or anything else vocal that you'd expect from a haunting. "You can use the board," I informed him, pointing to the wooden box. He walked over to it and using his finger spelled out, "Don't remember." He looked up at me again, still a sad look in his eyes. "Is it all right that I call you Pat?" I asked for the sake of him at least not having a name. He nodded, and the smirk came back. After that experience with Pat, my friends and I decided to look into other paranormal activities. We live in Ohio, so there was plenty to look into. There is only one experience, however, that stands out from the rest, and it would be the last. After inheriting the house following the death of my father from a years-long battle with cancer, I turned it into a base of operations for my friends and I. We would meet there and plan out where we would investigate. This time, it was an old abandoned mental hospital that was known as the Ridges. It was famously known to be haunted, so I was particularly excited to visit it, as it had been a dream of mine to do so ever since we first got into the paranormal game. As we pulled up to the front gates in our van, I could feel my heart racing from excitement. I have to advise anyone thinking of doing this to not do this. Not only is it actually trespassing, since overnight investigations aren't allowed, but what I encountered here scared me off of paranormal investigation for the rest of my life. It was when we stepped foot on the grounds that the horror would really begin. After jumping the gates and walking around outside, I noticed something in the window of one of the upper floors. I could see a man standing there, staring at me. He was completely white from head to toe. White clothes, pale skin, even white hair. Something about him made me feel incredibly uneasy, and everyone else said the same. We all knew that something was wrong, because never before had we been scared off of a location this easily. We got out of there pretty quickly, packed into the van, and took off. Guys, said Andrew, who was sitting in the back of the van with his wife, Jen. My girlfriend Jamie and I looked out of the back window and saw what he was seeing. There was the man in white, standing in the middle of the road, the only part of him not white being his eyes, which were instead glowing a bright red. I could feel my heart racing as we all tried to register what we had just seen. Soon I felt myself start to doze off when Andrew once again exclaimed, "Guys!" I sprung awake as Jamie and I turned around. "That thing is following us," he continued. As we looked out of the window again, Jamie squeezed my arm. The man in white was directly behind us, and it looked like he was just standing in place, but he was somehow keeping up with the car. At this point, we had all started to freak out, and I turned around to tell Bill, the driver, to speed it up. As I turned back around to look out of the window again, I noticed that the man in white was gone. "Where did he go?" asked Andrew. I don't know," I responded. "He just disappeared." We thought that maybe we outran it, or it just gave up, but then Jen started to act weird. Andrew had said she was feeling really sick, so she went to sleep on his shoulders. We didn't think anything of it, and just chalked it up to her being exhausted. When we got home, Andrew, Jen, and Bill said their goodbyes and left. We were concerned about Jen, because she still looked like absolute crap, and we hoped she was feeling better in the morning. Later that night, I began to feel sick myself. I felt like I was going to throw up, and ran to the bathroom, but nothing came out. I walked over to the sink and noticed how pale I was looking. I decided to turn in for the night, and Jamie agreed to stay the night to keep an eye on me. I fell asleep and was soon awoken by loud noises. My initial thought was that Pat must be active again, so at first I ignored it. It just kept going, however, which sounded like someone rummaging through the drawers in the kitchen. Suddenly, there was the sound of crashing and screaming. I recognized the voice as being Jamie, so I sprung out of bed and into the kitchen where the source of the noise was. Standing there was the man in white, standing over the bloodied body of my girlfriend. There were what appeared to be knife wounds all over her body, and a horrified look of pain and fear was frozen on her face. I screamed in anguish at the sight of her corpse, and with tears of anger in my eyes, I ignored my initial fear and ran directly at the man in white, tackling him and knocking the knife out of his hand. He put up a fight as I landed blow after blow on him, and I overpowered him surprisingly easily. Throughout it all, not a single drop of blood stained his clothes. He remained entirely clean, and the only part of him that was red was his demonic-looking red eyes. I reached over and grabbed the knife, ready to plunge it into his chest, but suddenly I felt a hand grab my arm. I looked over, and it was Pat. He was completely solid now, and I could see more features. On his face was a graying goatee, and his short hair also had spots of gray. Honestly, he looked similar to my father, with some minor differences here and there. "Don't," he said to me as he took the knife from my hands. He placed the knife on a counter and walked over to the man in white, who was now standing. A look of anger was plastered on his pale face, and the red eyes looked even more terrifying. "No," said Pat, as he grabbed the man by the throat. "Not this time." A look of fear replaced the anger on the pale man's face as Pat turned his head to face me. He gave me that signature smirk and nodded his head. I was completely confused as to what was happening, but I nodded in response. Pat then turned his attention to the man in white, still gripping his throat with both hands, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, a bright light came from Pat and engulfed them both. I could hear the sounds of a demonic wail as the light swallowed them and disappeared. Along with the light, Pat and the man in white were gone. Suddenly I looked to the floor where I'd beaten up the man in white and saw Jamie. She was crying and shivering in fear, her face bruised and bloody. "Jamie!" I exclaimed as I tried to approach her, but she screamed and backed away from me.
I looked at my hands, still covered in the blood that was not my own, and looked over at Jamie. It was at that moment that I had realized what I had done. It wasn't the man in white that I was attacking. It was Jamie. She sat on the floor, her arms around her knees, and sobbed. I fell to my knees and sobbed into my hands. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." This was 10 years ago. I have never experienced anything paranormal ever since, as I had given up the desire to seek it out. Even Pat is gone. I never saw him again after he and the man in white were engulfed by the bright light. All of my friends and my now ex-girlfriend are no longer part of my life. The reason the man in white took so long to attack me and Jamie was that he first attached himself to Jen. They weren't so lucky, and Jen ended up throwing Andrew out of their bedroom window and jumped herself after realizing what she had done. Bill was next, and he ended up getting hit by a car after running into the middle of traffic. After that was when the man in white possessed me. The only reason Jamie and I are alive was because of Pat. He stopped me from killing her, and he saved my life in the process. Jamie understood the situation, but couldn't stand being around me regardless. Seeing me kept reminding her of our friends, and she never forgot the experience of me nearly beating her to death. She left me shortly after she was released from the hospital. She claimed that she was attacked by a random assailant, so I never faced any repercussions for what I had done, even though a part of me still feels that I should. Even if I was manipulated by some evil entity, it was my hands that hurt her. I never forgave myself. I miss Jamie. I miss all of my friends. Most of all, though, I miss Pat. He was there my entire life. I don't know what exactly happened between him and the man in white, but he's gone now, and I blame myself. I brought that thing into my home because I was nosing around where I didn't belong. Pat saved me and Jamie and sacrificed himself to do it, and none of it had to even happen. I don't know where Pat came from, and I don't know where he went. I don't know if he was a ghost, an angel, or something else, but I am thankful that he was a part of my family for so many years. I hope that wherever he is at peace. So for context, me and my husband Gideon live in the Bronx with our 2 rescue cats, Mr. Watson and Disco Biscuit. Since I have classes and he has to work, the cats have the house to themselves throughout the day. Occasionally, they go on small adventures throughout the borough, usually coming back around 9 with a dead rat as a souvenir. But for the most part, they stay in the house. Some point in March, Gideon had the idea to buy those little cat cams that you strap onto your cat's collar so you can see what they do when you're not home. Basically, a feline GoPro. I was interested, and he found one for $15 on Wish, so he ordered it. Lo and behold, about 12 weeks later, the cams arrived. We knew we'd be out of the borough all day, so we figured it was as good of a time as any to strap on the cameras before we left. When we got back, we discovered that, as it turned out, neither bothered to leave the house that day, which made waiting for the cameras and the SD cards they contained much easier. We plugged discos into Gideon's computer, sat down on the couch and started watching. We skipped around for the first 3 or so hours, in which nothing happens, in a matter of minutes. At around noon, it gets weird. In the video, at 12:15, Disco is staring at the fridge eagerly. Watson is next to him, and they're trilling at each other. They sit there silently for about 2 minutes, until the door opens. Inside of the fridge sits a girl with her knees to her chin, holding the door open with her hand. She has thick dreads, shorts, a pink hoodie, and sandals. I doubt she's more than 17, But when she sees the kitties, she smiles, a big, wide, holy crap, it's a cat smile. She says something inaudible, still grinning, and the cats climb into the fridge with her. She shuts the door again. Even though the cameras are now inches away from her face, her voice still whispers. The thrum of the fridge makes it indecipherable. She begins to pet them. Disco purrs. The view from his camera becomes obscured as he nuzzles into her hoodie. After a few minutes of this, the girl stops whispering, indecipherable or not. A few minutes after that, Watson trills at Disco, and he looks up to see that the girl no longer has a head. With her free, non-cat petting hand, she presses a finger to where her mouth would be. She scratches Watson and Disco. Watson purrs. Disco does not, then opens the door. They both jump out. The rest of the footage, until the noise of the door swinging open and letting in me and Gideon, is simply Disco in a sunbeam, presumably napping. His camera records Watson sitting on the couch, his eyes closed. When the cops came a few hours ago to get the headless body out of our fridge, it was estimated she had been dead for about 3 weeks. Some of her nails were scattered around the bottom of our fridge. Her legs and arms were bloated and puffy. Her brown skin was a matisse of red and green from decomposition, plus blue from having frozen to death. The fridge had stopped the smell, but the visuals were left perfectly intact. About an hour ago, the girl's head was found 2 apartments down, in the freezer of an elderly Cuban woman that Disco was known to visit on his expeditions. She was in hysterics. Her English is poor, but she managed to say that she had never seen the girl in her life. Since all 3 of us were witnesses, I got to hug her on the way to the station. Once we got back, Gideon threw the cat cams out the window. Disco Biscuit seems to know something's wrong and is in bed, giving us cuddles. But Mr. Watson stays at the fridge, staring, meowing, tail flicking in curiosity. A few minutes ago, I even heard him scratching, something he's always known to keep on the scratch post. I know it's just my jumpy nerves, but I'm convinced that I keep hearing the fridge door swing open.
I stood still for a moment, awestruck. The pictures didn't do it justice. It was a large but quaint home, located on a secluded island near Cape Cod. A small piece of land void of life. Only the cottage and a lighthouse visible across the water, verified as an Airbnb plus rental. 1 week's rent came to a little over $3,000. The price was steep, but completely worth it. This would be the best place to clear my head and finish writing my novel. I happily trotted across the stone walkway to the front door and grabbed the knob, ready to map out the rest of my book. It would be my second release. My publisher had been breathing down my neck for months, constantly asking for updates. Now, I had the perfect environment to complete it. Upon opening the door, I was caught off guard. "Hello!" I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a man inside, late 50s, average build, gray mustache. It took me a moment to match the face to the one on his Superhost profile. It was Garrett, the owner of the property. "Oh, sorry, Garrett, you startled me. I didn't expect anyone to be here." He smiled. "I greet all my guests. You people are my livelihood, after all. Please come in. I have some important matters to discuss." I joined him in the living room. We sat in armchairs on opposite sides of a long coffee table. Garrett simply continued to smile. "So, what did you want to discuss?" I asked. He pulled a folded sheet of paper out from his jacket and slid it across the coffee table. It stopped in front of me. I picked it up for a closer look. The edges were worn, and it felt almost canvas-like between my fingers. I began unfolding, but Garrett stopped me. "Don't. You'll have plenty of time for that later. Just listen. I looked up at him, confused, but compliant. This house has been in my family for generations. Staying here can be a rewarding experience, but it can also be a dreadful one, if you're not careful. Come on, Garrett, don't tell me the place is haunted. I was the only one smiling now. Garrett looked at me, thoroughly unamused. My smile vanished, and I gestured for him to continue. On that sheet of paper are some rules. You must follow every last one of them. There are no exceptions. So long as you do this, your vacation will be a pleasant one. With that, Garrett stood up from the chair and walked to the front door. He turned to me on his way out and offered a final sentiment before leaving. Follow the rules, Jack. If you don't, you're in for a bumpy ride. When he left, I unfolded the list, expecting to see a reiteration of his stay requirements. No pets, no modifications, clean up after yourself, that sort of thing. This was not the case. On the paper was a set of rules that only served to bookend our strange encounter with further confusion. Number 1, no lights on past 11:25 p.m. Number 2, do not answer your phone. Callers cannot be trusted. Number 3, only 2 people are permitted inside, Hank Penston and Jessica Covenwood. Ask for last names. Number 4, do not exit the house after midnight until sunrise. Number 5, if your room changes location, close the door and try again. Only leave when connection has been re-established. Number 6, the voices are harmless. Do not converse with them. Number 7, never lock your doors. Number 8, if you have any trouble, call Jessica Covenwood at this number. This is the only phone call you can trust. This lifeline may only be used once during your rental period. At the bottom of the page was a final note. I will come to collect you, but only when the rental period is over, not a moment sooner. There is no leaving until then. As I sat there mulling over the list, it all became clear. Garrett was a lunatic. Either that, or this was a poor attempt at humor. Either way, I brushed off our meeting and the list of rules altogether, placing the paper on the coffee table where it stayed for the rest of the night. A majority of the first night was peaceful. Of my novel's final 6 chapters that needed completing, I was able to stay up late and finish 2 of them. First drafts, at least. There was still a lot left to do. My final days on the island would have to be spent proofreading the entire manuscript and filling cracks in the narrative before sending it to my editor. Still, 2 chapters was not a bad night's work, all things considered. After patting myself on the back for a job well done, I looked at my phone. It was 12:18 a.m. My lips spread into a slight smile as I looked at the desk light, wavering in and out of life. It's past 11:25, Garrett. Was this why I needed to turn off the lights, so they wouldn't flicker? I chuckled to myself as another rule came to mind. Number 4, if I remembered correctly, do not exit the house after midnight. I continued to laugh to myself as I ventured downstairs, opened the front door, and stepped out into the night. The view was brilliant. A blanket of stars covering the cape, only broken up by the gorgeous lighthouse jutting upward, practically cutting a hole in the night sky. It was a breathtaking sight, well worth the partial advance for my book. What's the reasoning behind this rule, Garrett? You didn't want me to enjoy the view? I turned and stepped back into the house. I then locked the door. Oops, that's another rule broken. Hope the house doesn't chastise me. With that, I traveled upstairs to the bedroom and fell into a blissful sleep the moment my body met the sheets. My slumber would not last. 3:27 a.m. I awoke to a thunderous banging at the front door. In a groggy slur of motion, my legs just barely managed to pull the rest of my body out of bed. Practically sleepwalking, I eventually made my way downstairs and opened the door. Outside, there were no longer any stars. Their light was replaced with a thick fog rolling over the ocean. The water and air were still, frozen in place. There was no one there but me. I closed the door and went back to bed, certain that the sounds I heard were remnants of a dream overlapping with waking life. My body fell onto the bed, and sleep took hold once more. 4:42 a.m. I awoke again, ripped from a dream state where I was turning in my novel to the publishing house. For whatever reason, in this dream, Garrett was my boss. He held the manuscript to my face and flipped the pages, revealing a lack of ink. "There's nothing here, Jack. All that time and nothing to show for it." He continued to flip through before stopping somewhere in the middle. Unlike the other pages, this one had text. The words were familiar, but they weren't written by me. Garrett's rules painted the page, the pitch black ink slowly dripping from the paper. His form soon followed, melting onto the floor below. "You should have followed the rules, Jack." That's when I sprung to life, my heart pounding as I sat up in bed. The sound of pages turning rang in my ears, but it hadn't leaked over from my nightmare. Over on the desk was my manuscript, its paper wildly flapping about. My heart nearly sank before I noticed a chill in the room. I had left the window open. It was just the wind. Relieved, I shut the window and went back to sleep. 5:19 a.m. No sound woke me this time. Instead, it was nature calling, beckoning me to take a late-night trip to the bathroom. Unfortunately for me, this would not be an easy task. Upon opening the bedroom door, I was greeted by a deeply unsettling sight. It was a hallway. Not the hall that should have been there, mind you. An entirely different hallway. Noticeably different. It was narrow, almost too thin for a person to walk through, and it was long, very long, seemingly longer than the building itself. Lining the sides was a plethora of doors, more doors than I knew the house to have. It was, by all means, unexplainable. I rubbed my eyes to test their acuity. The hallway was still there. I wondered for a moment if I was dreaming, but quickly discarded the notion, certain that I could tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't. But if not a dream, then what? With an air of hesitance about me, my feet pattered into the narrow void. I tried each door along the way, but they were all locked. Halfway in, a harrowing sound cut through the air. I turned my head to see that the bedroom door had shut itself. Running back and turning the knob was futile. It wouldn't budge. Without a whole lot of options, I continued down the hall. At the end was a final door, different than the rest. Affixed to it was a plaque with a designation, like one you might see in a hotel. According to the text, it was room 371. The knob offered no resistance as I turned it and gently pushed the door open. There was no light inside. Still, I could make out something standing in the center of the room, facing me. It was a shadowy figure, slightly darker than the blackness around it. A vague glow outlined its form. It was tall, taller than any man. I had the inclination to close the door and turn back, but fear kept me anchored in place. My breathing became erratic, and my heart rate soared to new heights as it took a step towards me. In a flash, it lunged to my position. Everything went black. My eyes opened to sunlight pouring into the room. I was back in bed. This was strange. Every bone in my body told me it wasn't a dream, but rational thinking dictated otherwise. I had no choice but to entertain the idea that I was having vivid night terrors in the face of a fast-approaching publishing deadline. The sooner I finished the book, I thought, the sooner they would vanish. Though it didn't sit well with me, it was the only explanation I had. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. I knew who it was, but with the deadline on the horizon, I couldn't afford the distraction. When the buzzing ceased, I crawled out of bed and started the day. My first few hours awake were productive. I was able to write over half of the next chapter and tweak some finer details throughout the rest of the book. My progress was, however, impeded by a knock at the front door. Unlike the night previous, there was someone out there. A man. "Can I help you?" I asked, confused. "Was hoping I could help you, actually. My name's Hank. I'm a locksmith from the mainland. Garrett sent me to check the locks on all the doors." I pondered for a moment and then grabbed the list of rules from the coffee table. I looked it over before meeting Hank back at the door. "Well, it looks like you're on the list." "Splendid. May I come in then?" An unnaturally wide smile danced across his cheeks. "Yeah, sure. Come in." Hank walked past the threshold and sighed. There was a long moment of silence before he spoke again. "What a lovely place. Can't wait to sink my teeth in and get to work." He then sauntered off upstairs. I sat down on the couch and continued writing, hoping my creative breakthrough hadn't subsided. An hour passed, then another. I was able to finish up some more work, but something kept scratching at the back of my mind. I knew locksmithing wasn't the loudest job out there, but I expected to hear at least some sort of tinkering coming from upstairs. The distant sound of keys scraping against the lock's inner chambers. But no, there was only silence. I then wondered why Hank was there to begin with. This was far from a typical rental experience, especially one on a secluded island. I skimmed the list again. 2 things stood out. Rule number 7, never lock the doors. Even if Garrett was deranged, it was clear he didn't want the doors locked. So why, then, would he send a locksmith? Who would be breaking in out here anyway? The second thing that jumped out at me was the end of rule number 3. Ask for last names. Something wasn't adding up, but I intended to get to the bottom of it. "Hank!" I yelled out, hoping to get his attention. There was no answer. "Hank, can you come down here, please?" No response, only silence. This was my cue to investigate. To my dismay, the second floor was completely vacant. I scoured every room, every nook and cranny the house had to offer, to no avail. Hank was nowhere to be found. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. How could a person just up and vanish like that? I returned to the first floor. Hank was there, sitting on the couch, looking over my manuscript. There was no way he could have snuck by me. "Say, this is pretty good. I wonder how it's going to play out. Help me out here, Jack. Is there a happy ending, or does the man succumb to his own demons?" I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs. "Hank," I asked, "what's your last name?" A grin formed beneath his nose. "Reedon. My name's Hank Reedon. Why do you ask?" I looked down at the list in my hands. Penston. His name was supposed to be Hank Penston. No reason, just curious. "Hey, do you mind tossing me my phone?" Hank looked down at my phone on the coffee table. A few moments passed before he grabbed it and looked over at me. He stared for a long time, almost as if calculating the distance, and then finally threw it over. I caught it and ran for the front door. "Thanks, I'll be right back." I sprinted to the edge of the island, unsure of who or what was inside the house. It was becoming ever apparent that Garrett might not be so crazy after all. Something truly strange was afoot, and I wanted no part of it. At first, I called the ferry station. No answer. Then Garrett. Still no answer. Before I could try another number, my ex-wife called. I had been ignoring her calls for weeks. "Charlotte, thank God. I'm at an Airbnb off the Cape. I need you to..." She interjected. "Leslie's dead, Jack." My blood ran cold. It was said with the same tone and resentment as it was 2 years before. All at once the floodgates opened and a slew of memories poured in, ones I had tried desperately to repress. Leslie was our daughter. Before Charlotte and I divorced, she was struck by a car on her way home from school. Charlotte was at work, and I was supposed to pick Leslie up, but I was too wrapped up in my first novel. I forgot all about her. My own daughter. She walked a good mile before the collision. I never forgave myself. Neither did Charlotte. Charlotte, why are you saying this? Tears rolled down my face. She's dead, Jack. It's your fault. My baby is dead. All because of you. Her voice became louder and less distant until I could barely recognize the cadence, an inhuman growl. You're to blame, Jack. You belong where you are. I hope you rot in that house. I looked down at the list, now stained with a steady stream of droplets dripping from my cheeks, and that's when I remembered rule number 2. Do not answer your phone. Callers cannot be trusted. As much as it pained me, I hung up on her. It wasn't real, but it sure as hell felt like it was. I wiped away my tears and looked at the last rule. Braving the fierce currents of the ocean likely wouldn't end well. The shore nearly 16 miles away, so Jessica was my only hope. The only phone call you can trust, according to Garrett. I dialed the number and waited. After 2 tones, my ear was met with a female voice. You broke a rule, didn't you? A few, actually, give or take. She let out a sigh. Did you let anyone in? Yes, Hank. Hank Penston? No, Hank Reedon. There was another disappointed sigh. Okay, listen carefully. I want you to go back to the house, but act natural. No sudden moves or conspicuous behavior. Any slight change in your attitude could set him off. Walk slow and be cautious. Okay. I did as instructed. On my way around the house, I looked through the window. Hank was no longer in the living room. There was a slight spike in my adrenaline, but I held my composure. Until turning the corner, that is. Standing at the back of the house waiting for me was Hank. Hey there, Jack. What are you up to? Jessica chimed in. Stay calm and repeat what I say, verbatim. Hank, I have Garrett on the phone. He wants to know if you can check the lock on the front door. He says it's been sticking lately. In the most casual voice I could muster, I repeated what Jessica said. Hank bore a stoic expression for a few moments and then spoke. That darn thing. I'll see what I can do. He walked past me and went off to the front of the house. I was officially rattled. Jessica's voice broke the tension. About a dozen yards from the house is an electrical box. Do you see it? I surveyed the area and noticed the box. It was embedded in a tree stump, of all places, one that stuck out of the ground at an awkward angle. Yes, I see it. Good. Open the hatch. There is a lever there. I want you to pull it down and then wait exactly 10 seconds, after which you will place it back in its original position and close the hatch. I was confused. How is this going to help exactly? There was a third sigh of frustration. That is the master switch. When you pull the lever, it will deactivate all energy on the island. When you reset the lever, the house will reconstitute. This will wipe the slate clean. I didn't understand how it all worked, but I had heard enough to warrant an obvious follow-up question. Couldn't I just leave it off? There was no sigh this time, just anger. No! The island is far worse when the energies are at bay. 10 seconds is all you're allowed. At this point, I saw Hank walking alongside the house. I fixed that lock for you, Jack. Jessica must have heard, because her voice adopted a tone of urgency. Pull the lever, now! I did as she said and began counting. Hank continued to walk toward me, his form phasing in and out like a bad television signal. Jack, what are you doing? Need a hand? His pace grew faster until his walk became a run. My heart was pounding. Just as he was closing in, the 10 seconds were up and I forced the lever back. Hank vanished completely and the stump receded into the earth below. I fell back onto the ground in relief. Jessica, we did it. Click. Clearly she wasn't as pleased with the victory as I was. That was fine. I was just thankful to be alive. Once inside the house, I laid down in bed and held the list to my face, scrutinizing every last detail. I was determined not to break another rule for the rest of the day. That night was peaceful. I made sure all the doors were unlocked, turned off the lights by 11:25, and refused to answer any calls. When I slept, there were no strange dreams. No dreams at all, in fact. It was a truly restful night. The best sleep I had had in years. Despite my predicament, I awoke hopeful that I could weather the storm and survive the week. I was even able to write some more of my book. Not much, but enough to jumpstart my creativity. The next night didn't go nearly as well. 2:12 a.m. I had woken without cause. In an effort to fall back asleep, I shut my eyes and allowed my mind to wander. I thought of my book and the deadline. I thought of my eventual departure from the island. Before long, I thought of Charlotte and Leslie. The image of our once happy family would forever be seared into my broken heart. I felt my eyes begin to water, but something interrupted the sadness. A sound. Footsteps. My eyes opened and I sprang to life, sitting upright in bed. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. With a great deal of apprehension, I got out of bed, took a deep breath, and tiptoed to the door. When I turned to the knob and opened it, I found myself at the entrance of the house. With rule number 5 in mind, I shut the door and opened it again. I was now at the living room. Next was the bathroom. Then a hallway. A familiar hallway. Off in the distance, I heard the click of room 371's door. The tall shadow stepped out. The hall began to shrink. The figure closed the gap between us in a matter of seconds. Luckily, my will to live outweighed the fear that held me in place. I managed to shut the door just in time to prevent my demise. When I opened it again, the room was back where it was supposed to be. 3:47 a.m. Just as I was finally drifting back to sleep, the voices started. "Hey Jack, enjoying your stay?" Though frightened, rule number 6 came to mind, and I followed it. The voices were harmless, and I was not to converse with them. "What's wrong, Jack? Hung up on Garrett's rules? That's no fun." I closed my eyes as the voice grew louder and hid beneath the covers. "Don't hide, Jack. We won't hurt you. Honest." The footsteps were back, walking outside the room. They stopped at the door. "He's here now, Jack. I can tell you how to make him go away, but you have to talk to me." The door creaked open, and the footsteps recommenced, walking over to the side of the bed. "He's leaning over you now. I can make him leave. Just say the word." I couldn't give in to the ploy. I had to obey the rules. But then, there was a tug on the sheets. My heart nearly stopped. "Wake up, Jack!" I jolted to a sitting position. The room was empty and the door shut. It was a dream. But that didn't explain the hand-shaped impression on the edge of the bed. No matter the culprit, I would endure the torment. It was only a week. "You can get through this, Jack." Leslie's face flashed in my mind and forced an unexpected tear out. "You've been through so much worse." The next few nights came and went without issue. There were some dicey moments, but I learned to handle the odd voice here and there, and the room moving every now and again. I ignored knocks at the front door altogether, avoiding any and all potential repeats of the Hank incident. Night 6, however, was by far the worst. Some things never change. Dark clouds loomed over the ocean as the waves crashed into the island. Just like the night Leslie was killed, I became deeply engrossed in my writing, to the point that nothing in the world could have pulled me away. Even after everything that had happened in the house, I was somehow able to finish the book. Maybe the shock to my system inspired me. My fear had transformed into focus, granting me a greater mental clarity. When all was said and done, and the editing complete, there was a horrible revelation. According to my phone, it was 11:24 p.m. My heart sank to the depths of my soul as I raced across the house, shutting lights off, knocking over furniture and decorations in the process. When I came back to the bedroom to turn off the final light at the desk, I glanced at my phone once more. The readout is now etched into my memory. 11:26 p.m. I clicked off the light, praying that my phone's readout was somehow wrong and that I still had time. 11:27 p.m. The bedroom door slammed itself shut behind me. I jostled the knob and pushed my weight against it, but it remained unmoved. A swirling black vortex of smoke was expelled from beneath the bed. It covered the floor in an instant and began rising to fill the rest of the room. I had no intention of waiting to see what would happen to me in the darkness, so I flung myself at the window and shattered the glass, landing on my back in a bed of shrubbery below. The impact knocked the wind out of me. Shortly thereafter, I passed out. 11:38 p.m. I dreamt. I knew it was a dream and not the house's doing because it was one I had had so many times before. The setting, my daughter's school. The bell rang and a stampede of children rushed out into the world, excited to leave for the day and see their parents. The last person out was Leslie, left alone to her own devices. "Daddy, where are you?" Her eyes darted back and forth. I tried to call out to her, but much like the day in question, I wasn't there. In the dream, I was only an observer, forced to watch as the horror unfolded before me. Leslie waited for 15 long minutes before heading off in the direction of our home. I bore witness to her trek, a poor girl alone in the cold. And then, it happened. Dream tears flooded my field of view as a car swerved and the heart-wrenching scream of that beautiful young girl rang through the winter air. 11:56 p.m. I woke up on the ground, covered in tears and broken glass. The ocean waves crashed against the walls of the house. There was no time to waste. Without my phone, I didn't know exactly what time it was, but it had to be close to midnight. Another broken rule would only make matters worse. I raced to the front door, opened it, and swiftly shut it behind me, somewhat thankful to be back in the house, but also somewhat terrified. The coming moments would echo the latter emotion, adding to my woes. 12:05 a.m. I was able to open the bedroom door and retrieve my phone. Luckily, the smoke had vanished. Upon venturing back down to the living room, I was shattered, just like the glass on the ground outside. There, sitting on the couch where Hank sat before, was Leslie. My Leslie. I reached the bottom step and nearly fell to my knees, almost forgetting to breathe in the process. She was the same, exactly the same, every feature identical to the day I last saw her. How was this possible? "Hi, Daddy." Her voice pulled a wave of emotion out of me, stronger than anything I had ever felt before. Was it really her? Was this really my precious Leslie, brought back to life? Surely this wasn't the house's doing. Was it? "Sweetheart, is that you? Is it really you?" She looked over at me with innocent eyes. "Yes, Daddy, it's me." I ran over to her and took her in my arms, my face now drenched in an ocean of tears. "Oh, Leslie, sweetheart, I missed you so much. I missed you so much." I pulled away to get a better look at her. That's when I saw it. For an instant, in between blinks, her eyes were solid pools of black. This was not my Leslie. I backed away at once. "What's wrong, Daddy?" I continued my retreat to the stairs. "You're not real. This isn't real. We buried you." Her next words stopped me in my tracks. "No, Daddy. You buried me." Her eyes locked with mine as I cried, "You killed me. You're the reason I'm dead." I took a pained breath before responding, "You're right. I was a terrible father, and I deserve every moment of torture this house puts me through. If I ever get out of here, I'm going to visit your grave for the first time and tell you how sorry I am, and how much I've missed you over the years. Not a day goes by that the guilt doesn't eat me up inside." I swallowed the lump in my throat and wiped away the tears as she looked up at me, her head tilted in observation. "But you're not her." I ran up those stairs as fast as I could. Leslie's piercing screams echoed through the house, followed by the sound of every window breaking in reaction to the pitch. Once in the bedroom, I closed the door behind me and slid down into a sitting position on the floor against it, utterly defeated and emotionally drained. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jessica's number. After 2 tones, she picked up. "What is it this time? Don't tell me you broke another rule." "I think I'm going to die tonight, Jessica." Her perturbed tone vanished, replaced with concern. "Jack, what did you do? What's going on over there?" "I can't fight it anymore. It's too much." As much as I wanted to live, I could feel myself giving up. I don't even know why I called her. She couldn't help. The lever was gone, and it was past midnight. The storm outside was destroying the house. Soon I would be swept out to sea, never to be heard from again. "Hold on, Jack. I'll be there soon." Click. She wouldn't be coming. Even if the ferries ran that late, they wouldn't dare operate in a storm that violent. The end was near, and I could feel it. 1:13 a.m. After a good long while of wallowing in self-pity, there was a knock at the front door. Jessica? No, it couldn't be. I cautiously exited the bedroom and slowly descended the staircase to the living room below. The storm raged on outside, a gust of wind howling through the house. In reaching the bottom step, I noticed that the coast was clear. Leslie's ghost was nowhere in sight. As quickly as I could, without drawing any unwanted attention to myself, I pattered over to the door and opened it. Behind it was a beautiful woman in her 30s, black hair, peach skin, and a tasteful spattering of freckles on either side of her nose. "Jessica?" I asked. "Who else would it be?" Her voice and sassy attitude answered my question in spades. I stepped aside and she barged in, clearly upset. I closed the door behind her, careful not to lock it and risk breaking another rule. I was less scared of the supernatural consequences than I was of Jessica's fury. "You really had me worried, Jack. What did you do, anyway?" Before I could answer, a small figure appeared from behind the couch. It was Leslie. Jessica followed my gaze and looked across the room. "Jack, who's that?" "My daughter. I didn't know she was here with you. You don't understand. My daughter has been dead for 2 years." Jessica backed up to the door where I was still standing. "Oh, I see." Just as before, Leslie let out an awful shriek that rang through the house. It was louder than before, much louder. Jessica turned to me, our hands cupping our ears. "Jack, we need to get out of here. Follow me." We raced past Leslie and up the stairs to the bedroom. "Okay, Jack, let's get going." She shut the door and opened it. She continued this routine, revealing the many rooms of the house. At one point, it opened up into the living room. Jessica quickly slammed it shut before Leslie could make her way in to get to us. Finally, it opened up into the hallway. Yes, that hallway. Jessica grabbed my wrist. "Come on, let's go." I yanked my arm back in refusal. "Are you insane? I've been in there and I don't plan on going back. Have you seen room 371? Jessica let out one of her signature sighs. "Yes, I know all about it. So long as we get to where we're going before the shadow notices, we'll be fine. Now come on, we don't have a whole lot of time here." I reluctantly respected her wishes. I wasn't keen on facing that ominous stretch of hall again, but Jessica's advice hadn't failed me yet. Besides, I was ready to die just an hour ago. Whatever fate would befall me in there couldn't be any worse than seeing my dead daughter resurrected. Okay, Jessica, I'm ready. 1:36 a.m. Matching each other's pace, step for step, we disappeared into the dark hallway, the bedroom door closing behind us. I whispered, so as not to wake the beast. Where are we going anyway? None of the doors down here open. Without hesitation, she answered, one does. It took a moment for it to sink in. No, Jessica, are you serious? I can't go in that room. It lives in there. She turned to me and put her hands on either side of my face. She stared into my eyes with a look of pure kindness. I was taken aback by the unexpected intimacy. Jack, you need to calm down. Just trust me. We are going to be fine, I promise. As far as explanations go, that was pretty vague. Still, it was reassuring. I can't explain it, but I was compelled to believe her. There was something about Jessica I really liked. A warmth that radiated around her. A contagious, soothing force. We continued down the hall, and I didn't bring up my reservations again. 1:42 a.m. We reached the door. This was it, the moment of truth. I was about to open it when Jessica pulled my hand back. In order for this to work, you need to knock 3 times. No more and no less. I nodded in agreement. I raised my hand to the wood and knocked precisely 3 times. A deep anxiety racked my nerves as the anticipation grew. After a few moments, the door was pulled open, revealing the shadowy figure within. It stepped away and motioned for us to enter. I looked over to Jessica for approval. She nodded and followed me in. The entity softly closed the door behind us. It then walked over to where we stood and changed. Its dark form turned to light, illuminating the rest of the room. It was the bedroom, only it wasn't exactly the same. Something was amiss. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It just felt different. The bright figure then shrunk down to a glowing orb and drifted away, phasing through one of the walls, leaving us by ourselves. Moonlight shone through the window. The glass wasn't broken anymore. There was no storm outside. Everything was pristine. Jessica, what just happened? This is the house's safe space, a fail-safe for when too many rules are broken. She could tell I wasn't following. It's a copy of the bedroom from just before things went south, a moment suspended in time that we can stay in for a while. At dawn, everything will revert to normal. Why didn't you tell me about it before? Honestly, it's a risky move. The shadow is a fickle being. When you enter room 371, there's only a 50% chance he'll accept your entrance. Otherwise, you're doomed. I couldn't believe it. You're telling me that we could have died? You risked our lives on a 50% chance? She came over and placed her hands on my face again. Jack, we're safe. There's no need to be angry. Relax. We would have died anyway at the hands of the house. This was our only option. She was right. Honestly, I was happy she was there. Without her, I would have been a goner. 3:17 a.m. Jessica spent some time going over my manuscript. I filled in some of the blanks so she could skip the more fatty sections and finish before bed. Jack, this is beautiful. I wasn't so sure. Maybe I put too much of myself in it. Maybe the blood I poured onto the pages covered up the meaning. Who in their right mind would want to swim through my despair to reach a story even I wasn't sure I believed in? It's about you, isn't it, Jack? This is your life from the moment your daughter died to now. I felt myself unraveling. I'm tired, Jessica. I think I'm going to call it a night. I offered her a half smile, waltzed over to the bed, and laid down. To my surprise, she laid down with me and placed her hand on my chest. "It's okay, Jack. I've never lost a child, so I can't imagine the kind of things you're dealing with. I do know that things will never be the same. That doesn't mean you have to give up. What would your daughter have wanted?" There was no fighting my tears any longer. "You don't understand, Jessica. I'm responsible. She was waiting for me when it happened. I was her father and I wasn't there for her when she needed me." Jessica didn't respond. I sobbed until there was nothing left in me. When the moment passed, I asked her a question. "Why do these things happen here?" "Honestly, I don't really know." We turned to each other. Her warmth reared its head again, inviting me to come to it. Our lips met, and with it, an intense feeling was born, like nothing I had ever felt. A somber, quiet energy filled the air and coated the room. In a turn of events I will never fully fathom, Jessica and I made love. 5:32 a.m. Jessica fell asleep in my arms. I stayed awake, content for the first time in years. Then, a familiar disembodied voice burrowed into my ear and poisoned my mind. "What you're feeling isn't real." By this point, I was all too familiar with the voices and their antics. I ignored its statement. "She does this to every tenant. She's a seductress." I was tempted to reply, but conversing was forbidden. I couldn't afford a broken rule this close to the finish line. "Only 2 people are allowed in, Jack. 2. It's a simple rule." What did that have to do with anything? What was the voice up to? Jessica was one of the 2. Despite my unrest, I continued to bite my tongue. "Always ask for last names." There was a moment of pause before the realization washed over me. I gasped. A rule had indeed been broken. I jumped and backed into the corner of the room. Jessica was standing next to the bed. I hadn't even seen her get up. "Jack, are you okay?" My breathing became labored. It was hard to construct my query in a normal fashion. "Jessica, are you really you? What is your last name?" The light left her face. Her now empty eyes cut right through me. I slid to the floor. A long period of silence passed before anything changed. Before she changed. 5:51 a.m. Jessica's face widened. Her eyes became large, as if physically engorged with bloodlust. She lunged at me. I dodged the attack and hit the door hard. I reached for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. Jessica's new form spoke, a gurgling metallic sound that ricocheted off the walls. "It looks like you're stuck with me, Jack." She lunged again. I slid under the bed to escape her reach. Her feet paced around its perimeter, a predator circling its prey. It was just a matter of time now. I closed my eyes and thought of Charlotte and Leslie playing in the snow, the last day I saw them together. This would be my final thought as death approached. As beautiful a thought as one could have before dying. At least now, I could be with her again. A pained outcry from Jessica broke my concentration. The light in the room had changed. I rolled out from underneath the bed and saw her writhing in the corner. The sun was coming up over the horizon outside. This was my chance. I raced over to Jessica and clenched her neck. She struggled, but was too weak to break free. I forced her against the window. Her skin melted, dripping like candle wax to the floor. Her hair burned to a crisp. I looked to her eyes for even a shred of humanity, something that might convince me to spare her for all she had meant to me. There was none, only malice. In that moment, I sincerely wished that she had been real. Goodbye, Jessica. With as much force as I could muster, I pushed her through the window. Her form disintegrated before it could reach the ground. The wind carried her ashes away into the endless expanse of the ocean. She was no more. The house was still. Hours passed. As my rental period came to a close, I sat in the living room and reflected on the events of the week. In a weird way, I had come to terms with Leslie's death. The guilt would always be there, but I felt I could move on now, free of the restraints that once bound me. Knock, knock. I opened the door and let Garrett in. "Your ferry awaits." I nodded and gathered my things. I was anxious to leave, but felt the need to ask him something first. "Garrett, what is this place?" He smirked. Many words come to mind. Anomaly, portal, impossibility. I personally think it's a mirror, showing us ourselves in a way we never thought possible. A place where our past and present intersect. Perhaps the right word for it is closure. I smiled. "You might be onto something, Garrett." "Splendid. Splendid. Does that mean you'll leave a good review?" I chuckled. "You know what? I'll do it right now." I opened the app and clicked through to the listing. A bit of information caught my eye as I scrolled. Checkout time, 12 p.m. I looked up at the readout at the top of my phone's display. It turned from 11:59 to 12 as I watched. I let someone in before time was up, meaning a rule had been broken. The note at the end of the list came to mind as the dread set in. "I will come to collect you, but only when the rental period is over. Not a moment sooner." That wasn't Garrett. I looked up to see him standing directly in front of me. "Something wrong, Jack?" I dropped my things and ran out to the dock as fast as I could. The ferry had just arrived, the real Garrett aboard, motioning for me to hurry. After boarding, I turned back and looked at the house one last time. She was referred to me by a colleague. I read through her case file as I always do with new patients. This one was another object in the brain. The usual course would be me moving the object, follow-ups with the patient as they recover, yearly scans, and so forth. It was probably another brain tumor. I am a surgeon, and I don't have a set specialty, unless removing objects and tumors from every corner of the body is a specialty. A tumor in the brain that no brain surgeon dares touch? Come see me. I'll gladly attempt removal. Oftentimes, I can completely remove the tumor. As I said, I deal with strange cases. My office door opens as a raven-haired woman in her early 20s entered. Her blue eyes dart around, fearfully, resting on George, floating serenely inside his jar. I stand and hold out my hand. "Don't mind George. He can be rather nerve-wracking when you don't expect him," I said. "I'm Dr. Strand. Please sit." We sit. The woman is still eyeing George warily. I reached over and turned the jar. George's single eye is open. It winks at me and closes. I swear George is alive sometimes. Inside, I'm doing the happy dance. This case is going into the journal for sure. George only does this for very promising cases. "What brings you to me this fine day?" "I got picked up in a CT scan," the woman responded nervously. "My name is Hannah. I was referred to you by Dr. Charles." Looking back now, those words should have clued me in. "I see. Any symptoms?" I moved through my usual line of questions. "Anna had a concussion. She was scanned while still unconscious, and I was found. Doctor, please don't cut me out. Anna needs me," Hannah said. Psychosis. I wrote it down. "I'm scheduling you for surgery tonight, Hannah. You will feel much better after." I paged my nurse, Miss Tanning. "Tan, prepare room 2 for Hannah." You don't understand, Doctor, Hannah pleaded. Let me explain.
That's just the tumor talking, I reassured.
I'm not a tumor.
That's enough now. I drew a syringe filled with amber fluid. This will help calm you. With deft movements, I had Hannah sedated by the time Miss Tanning entered with a wheelchair. While she took care of Hannah, I looked down at George. He was blinking his eye and wiggling his single finger. A little about George. He was removed during the 1950s by my grandfather. He was such an anomaly that Grandpa had him preserved in a jar, which he displayed on his desk. After Grandpa passed, I inherited George. For being a mismatch of body parts and flesh, he was kind of cool. I left my office to go prepare my OR. This should be a rather quick surgery. The tumor rested against the brain, and it looked like a single vein connected it to the brain. After preparing my OR, I showered thoroughly and changed into my scrubs. Again, I studied the images. Yep, this should be quick, an hour at most. Tanning wheeled Hannah into the room. She had shaved her head and marked the area I would be working on. I hummed softly as Hannah was put under. Once she was out, I went to work. Opening the brain case, I heard a scream.
Don't remove me.
Tana and I looked at each other. I exposed more of the tumor. It didn't look like a tumor usually does. It looked like a tiny baby. Again, the thing spoke.
Please don't remove me. Anna will die without me.
As I deal with the strange, I wasn't surprised. Hannah will be just fine without you. I continued cutting.
No, you don't understand. I'm Hannah.
I cut it free.
No, no.
The thing expired in my hand. Setting it aside, I sewed Hannah back up. That's the third one to talk, Tanning said to me as we stood over the tiny body. Yes, it is. It is nothing more than a parasite living off its host. I began to dissect it. How some of them can talk when they don't even have the parts needed to do so is beyond me. This one has a mouth at least.
What do you make of it?
Tanning asked minutes later. Suspicion was setting in. The tumor had called itself Hannah and clearly didn't want to be removed. But why? I might have killed the patient, Tanning. This isn't a parasite in the normal sense.
What do you mean?
Normally in these cases, the parasitic twin is never alive. In this case, it's Anna, as Hannah called her, who was never alive.
You mean Anna was the parasite, and not that?
Tanning pointed at Hannah on the table. That's right. I was 13 when I learned it was possible to fear something to the very depths of your being, to the point where your bones are weary from the weight of fighting it, and every exhalation only grants temporary respite from your unspoken terror before it swells in strength to consume you wholly upon inhaling. I was 17 when I learned it was possible to love something just as strongly. Smoke turned lazy pirouettes in the air between us as Priya took another drag off her cigarette before extinguishing it delicately under her battered Doc Martens and turning to me with a smirk. Ready? I immediately hopped off the hood of her beat-up teal 99 Corolla and jumped in the passenger seat. Let's go. I told Zach we'd meet them there. As we drove, I couldn't help but keep glancing over at Priya. I had memorized her profile long ago, maybe even the moment I first spotted her across the classroom at the beginning of the school year, 10 months prior. I was used to moving around, thanks to my military parents' mistaken belief in the concept of anchor babies to save their relationship. It didn't, but at least I got some sympathy presents every time their personal ping-pong battle over me caused me to be uprooted again. She had caught my eye that first day and held it ever since. Thick black hair, slightly unruly, fell over her flannel-clad shoulders. Deep brown eyes ringed with intentionally unintentional looking black, set in a solemn face.
They winced slightly as we all heard the teacher stumbling over her name. Priyadarshini? Just call me Priya, please. Yes, sorry about that, Priya. Jacob Isington. A boy to my left raised his hand as I watched Priya roll her eyes at the repeated mispronunciation and look around the room. Her gaze landed on mine for the briefest of seconds before I quickly focused intently on how suddenly fascinating my notebook had become. The next day after class, she was lingering just past the doorway as we all filed dutifully out like tired ants. Hey, you're new here, right? What's your name? I shoved my hands deep into my jean pockets and pretended I couldn't feel my face growing hot. Eden. I caught my first glimpse of the smile that still held me mesmerized then. Eden, hello. I snapped out of my reverie and realized we had already made it to the reservoir. Oh, sorry, I zoned out. I scrambled out of the car and walked over to her side, trying to pretend the sound of the rushing water didn't terrify me. Wow, it's bigger than I thought. I still can't believe you've never been out here. You've been here almost a year? I should have brought you out to see it way sooner. Isn't it gorgeous? I tore my eyes away from Priya to look at the roaring falls in front of us. Yes, it is. My heart sputtered as she grabbed my hand and pulled me over closer to the water. Look, I see Zach and Charlie over there. Let's go. 30 minutes later, I was thoroughly stoned and attempting to pretend I wasn't, even though the other three were clearly just as far gone. It's weird how big water is, isn't it? Like, how did nature just know to make the falls and have them lead into the reservoir? Charlie mused before stifling a deep cough. I nodded and tried to think of something equally insightful to say back. Yeah, man, I responded. It's crazy. Oh well. We sat and continued smoking until the sun set. The woods looked different in the dusk, no longer lush and inviting. Suddenly, the air felt brisk and foreboding. The rolling crashes of the water sounded much more ominous, and I could feel anxiety beginning to gnaw at my mind as I tried to fight its grip. It's okay, Eden. It's okay. Nobody here knows why you're afraid of it. No one knows about what happened. You're all right. You're safe with friends. Focus on Priya. For the millionth time, I studied her features as if they were the most important test I'd ever take. In a way, they were. I traced a path along the arches of her eyebrows, the crinkles in the corners of her eyes, and down to 3 freckles she hated that I so loved, that made a triangle between her mouth, ear, and just under the shelf of her jaw. I felt my breath beginning to slow back to a normal rate, as though the sheer loveliness of her physical existence was a tonic or pill soothing my stresses. I closed my eyes, and the memories of things I had vowed never to revisit were replaced by the lingering image of her smile. When I was 13, my parents were freshly navigating their divorce. So far, their plan appeared to be scream at each other at every interaction and force my little brother and me into the middle of each battle. Cody. He was 4 years younger, and eternally trying to convince me that didn't mean he was any less cool, even though it definitely did. After all, I was an 8th grader, and he was barely in 4th. That's practically a baby. We were living in Michigan at the time, and it was my responsibility to walk the 2 blocks from the middle school to his elementary and pick him up so we could head home together. Quintessential latchkey kids. I tried to romanticize the term and tell us both that it meant we were entrusted to go on clandestine adult adventures for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, and not that it meant that whichever parent had us that week would be too exhausted to do anything other than make sure our homework was done and we were fed before ignoring us the rest of the evening. I'll never know what made me decide that day was different, that we needed an actual adventure. I'll regret that day as long as I live. Come on, Cody, I called back as he ran as fast as his 9-year-old legs could try to catch up. I brought stuff so we can have a picnic. We raced each other to the water's edge, and sat as close to it as we could without scaring ourselves. We munched our snacks and drank the secret sodas we weren't allowed to have, and chatted giddily about how dumb the kids in our respective classes are. I laughed until I cried at Cody's impersonation of this bonehead named Gabe, who'd snorted milk up his nose at lunch. We were both filled with an enhanced glee from the fact that we were out on pilfered time, enjoying some blissful peace away from the angry shouting and bitter neglect of our parents. "Eden, I have a baseball in my bag. Can we please play catch for a while before we go? Please?" Cody pleaded, bouncing up and down with eagerness. "Sure, dude," I laughed back. "We only have about 20 minutes before we need to head home, though." "Oh boy, that's plenty of time," Cody exclaimed as he ran to put some distance between us before releasing the ball. I watched it soar toward me and smiled a genuine grin for the first time in months as I caught it and threw it back. Sure, we all know little brothers are annoying, but I guess mine wasn't so bad sometimes. We tossed the ball back and forth, laughing when one of us missed the catch, or the other had to run to chase it. I leaned exaggeratedly far back, twirling my arm around in the air, dramatically. "Okay, get ready, Cody. This one's gonna put Babe Ruth to shame." The ball rocketed through the air, higher than I'd even honestly thought I could throw. Cody began running backwards, determined to make one final glorious catch to make us both proud. And then he tripped. I watched, horrified, frozen in place, as he stumbled and flailed, fighting to regain his balance. Oh God, he wasn't going to be able to. He was too close to the edge. Why had we played so close to the water? There is nothing in the world that can ever prepare you for the sight of your loved one's mangled body lying small and bloodied on a bed of rocks. Water rushing up to embrace them, as though it was trying to wash away the carnage and return what fate had just stolen. My parents claimed they forgave me, but it was obvious they didn't. As much as that hurt me, I knew they were right. It was my fault. I moved away again with my mom shortly after, to a 2-bedroom apartment where we could pretend that we had never needed a home that had a third. "Eden, you okay? You've been acting off ever since we went to the reservoir the other day. Is something going on?" Priya's concerned expression met mine as she reached out to rub my arm. "You know I'm here for you, right?" I tried to smile, but we both knew I looked and felt like crap. I'd seen my own face, hollow looking, with shadows under the eyes, in the mirror. "Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. I just haven't been sleeping well lately." That much, at least, was true, though I left out the fact that I had been having dreams of Cody every evening. I could have sworn I was even seeing glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye sometimes. We resumed chatting about mundane things and then returned to class. The time since we had gone to the lake all began to blur together as it passed, days fading into weeks, save for one thing out of the ordinary. I was now certain I was seeing Cody everywhere I went. I'd be jotting down notes in creative writing and look up to see him peeking around the corner of the ajar classroom door, or cooking myself dinner and hear footsteps across the room and turn to look, only to see him dart out of sight. I had been sitting in the passenger seat of Priya's car and jolt to attention because I was convinced I had seen Cody jumping rope in a neighbor's yard or playing on the monkey bars in the park. I was sleeping less than ever and just pretending I was fine when anyone asked. 3 haunted weeks passed before Priya told me that we had to go back to the water. "I know you didn't love it there last time, but it'll be so fun, Eden. You have to come, it's Charlie's birthday, and we're all meeting up there. Please? For me?" she asked, grinning and squeezing my hand quickly. I could feel myself flushing with nervousness and excitement from the contact, despite how weary I was. "Okay, I'll do it for you." That night, I dreamt about Cody again. We were back in Michigan, enjoying our picnic and laughing in the sunshine when he suggested playing catch. I immediately said no. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if we did, even after such an idyllic afternoon on our secret adventure. Cody begged and pleaded until I eventually gave in. In time, I shook off the dread that had overcome me, and I laughed as I wound up theatrically. "Okay, get ready, Cody. This one's gonna put Babe Ruth to shame." The ball rocketed through the air, higher than I'd even honestly thought I could throw. Cody began running backwards, determined to make one final glorious catch to make us both proud. And then he tripped. I watched, horrified, frozen in place, as he stumbled and flailed, fighting to regain his balance. He wasn't going to be able to. He was too close to the edge. Why had we played so close to the water? There is nothing in the world that can ever prepare you for the sight of your loved one's mangled body, lying small and bloodied on a bed of rocks, water rushing up to embrace them, as though it was trying to wash away the carnage and return what fate had just stolen. I bent over the ground, retching and sobbing from what I had seen, hysterical with fear and shock. "Eden, Eden," Cody's voice cried from beyond the falls. He was alive. How could it be? His body had been so shattered. I didn't understand. I raced to make it over to the edge, scrambling to climb down to him. "Eden!" came his scream from below. I stopped panicking, scurrying momentarily to look at him. I wished I hadn't. His skull was decimated. White fragments of bone gleamed from underneath electric red blood, with bits of gray poking out from between the shards. I realized with sinking horror that I was seeing pieces of his brain emerging from the safety of its home. His legs lay askew in directions they weren't naturally intended to, and one arm was cocked up above his shoulders, almost pressed to his face in a pseudo-comical, "aw shucks, how did I do this" pose. I watched with growing terror as he sat up. "Eden, wake up!" he bellowed. The next day was pure hell. I shambled through my classes like a zombie. I saw Cody everywhere I went. He was sitting next to me in AP History. He was outside on a bench during lunch. He accompanied Priya and me in the backseat of her car on our trip to the reservoir. He never said a word, only casting mournful looks at me every time I was unsuccessful in avoiding his eye contact. We silently got out of the car as a trio, both Priya and Cody sending concerned glances my way as we gathered the birthday supplies from the trunk and began trekking over to the old bridge where everyone else was gathered. We had just made it across the creaking bridge when Priya exclaimed, "Crap, I forgot the lighter for the candles. I'll be right back. You guys get set up." Before I could respond, Cody let out an ear-piercing scream. No one reacted. He stood there, stock still, mouth open in an unwavering wail of terror and pain, as everyone carried on laughing and arranging the food and decorations. I turned to look back at Priya, who was trotting across the bridge. It began to sway as she neared the end. It began to collapse right as she was almost off of it. It dangled mockingly as she tumbled into the depths below. "Priya!" I screamed with an agony and fear I hadn't felt in 4 years. Without any hesitation or thought of anything beyond saving Priya, I dove into the raging waters after her. I came up sputtering and gasping for air, frantically trying to make my way to where she was. I had to get to her. I had to help her. I couldn't lose another person I loved. I fought against the flow of the water, battling with every ounce of determination in me. I wasn't going to make it to her. I struggled to keep my head above the water and saw a cluster of thick branches poking out several feet from the side of the reservoir's edge, and pulled myself onto the sturdiest one. "Priya, swim to me!" I watched as she bobbed up and down in the water, coughing and choking as she tried to stay afloat. She looked disoriented, turning rapidly in every direction with no idea where salvation lay. I could hear our friends racing down the path to the water, but they were still too far away. There was no one who could help her but me. Please don't let me lose anyone else. I called out again, and began pushing my way toward her, still clutching the branch with all my might. "Priya, I'm here. I've got you. Just come a little bit forward, and I can help you. Priya, please, listen to me. I love you. I can't lose you." I was growing more fatigued by the second. My arms felt like lead as they continued to hold onto the branch as I wrestled my way toward her. With terror in her eyes, she looked at me and tried to say something before diving under the water. "No. Priya!" I fought with a renewed vigor to get to her and realized she was trying to swim to me. I battled against the current until I was almost to her. "Priya, grab onto the branch!" She had been under the water too long. Where was she? Panicked, I ducked under the surface myself, trying to see through the choppy waves to where she was, but not making out her form anywhere. I clung to the branch like a life raft as I grappled my way through the water, heart sinking with each passing moment. I couldn't bear the thought of losing someone else so dear to me. Not again. I couldn't live with that soul-rending anguish again. I didn't want to live through it again. I burst back up to the air, panting, feeling tears and water streaming down my face, when suddenly I felt a hand grab onto mine. I jerked at the sensation and began bawling upon seeing who was holding me. Priya. No sight in the world had ever felt more like home than her eyes. I was able to drape her arms around the branch too, as we both bobbled in the water. By that time, the others had already made their way down the path and began to form a chain to pull us out. As we were being hauled from the water, shivering and sobbing, I glanced up at the broken remnants of the bridge and saw a small figure darting back into the trees beyond. "Thank you, Cody. I miss you." I looked back at Priya, lying collapsed on the ground next to me. I watched as she coughed and weakly reached her hand out to mine, intertwining our fingers. "I love you too, Eden." My mom has always struggled with her weight and body image, so I suppose that's what drew him to her. Despite her problems, she never let it ruin her spirit and zest for life. There was never a day a smile wasn't on her face. She was smiling the day he walked through the doors of the community center and introduced himself as the genius behind a radical new weight loss program. He was as skinny as a rake, gangly, gaunt, and tall, and yet he claimed to have been medically diagnosed as morbidly obese just a week prior. I didn't like the look of him. I always came with my mom to her Weight Watchers meetings for moral support. I never had an issue with any of the other people who took the class, but this man, there was something unnerving about his piano key smile and his slick black hair, door-to-door salesman look. "Just take one pill a day and the weight will just drop off." He grinned as he held up a black capsule in his fingers. What was most upsetting was the eagerness of my mom and the others to try these pills out. I strongly and vocally protested against using them. I mean, the pills could have been anything, and diet pills aren't exactly known for being safe at the best of times. However, my mom and the others looked at me like I was some outsider, an intrusive voice who didn't know what it was like to be one of them. "Well, young man, I understand your hesitation, but I assure you, I have taken them myself. They are perfectly safe and totally organic," preached the salesman. Ken, a great swell of a man, asked how much they would cost. Nothing at all," answered the man with a wide grin. If I wasn't suspicious before, I was now. Nothing in this world is free. I could see my disbelief was offending the group and upsetting my mom, so I kept my mouth shut, whilst my mom and the others rushed up and snatched box after box. One pill a day for 1 week. Eat anything you want and gain nothing. That saying, if it sounded too good, it probably is, comes to mind. However, I didn't want to upset my mom, so when she started taking the pills, I was supportive and kept my doubts to myself. To my surprise, it seemed to be working. She would gorge herself like a beast, devouring an all-you-can-eat buffet in one sitting, and yet when she'd get on the scales the next morning, she hadn't gained a pound. Stranger still was the slime. Around the same time of my mom's new diet, slime trails like that of a slug began to appear in the house. They were far larger than slug trails though, and they seemed to slither through the house and out through the cat flap. I told my mom, but she didn't seem bothered. In fact, all she was interested in was eating. I wasn't sure if it was because she was actually hungry, or whether it was because she wanted to prove how good the pills were. McDonald's, Domino's, KFC, and Wendy's, you name it, and she would shovel it in. She was like a starved animal, gluttonous and unending in her appetite. But she told me not to worry. She had the pills. They would keep her from gaining weight. Eventually, though, her pills ran out, and that's when things went from weird to bad. Mom started dropping the weight like crazy. She went from like an XL to a large in a day, and then a day after that, she was down to a small. In a matter of a week, her body was like a skeleton, her clothes hanging off her like blankets. But she was thrilled. "Look how thin I am. Aren't I beautiful?" she said, looking at herself in the mirrors. I wanted to tell her she was always beautiful, but I didn't. "Yeah, Mom, you look amazing," I said. However, she just got thinner and thinner. After my mom became bedbound and nearly unable to breathe, I stayed by her bed every night, often falling asleep in the armchair near her. One night, I heard an unusual sound. Slurping. The sound was disgusting, and eventually it roused me from my slumber. When I opened my eyes, I let out an audible gasp, swallowing all the air in the room. Before me was a shocking sight. Sucking on my mother's flesh were countless white bulbous leech-like things. They were everywhere, each the size of a football, and all of them voraciously snacking on my mother. Shocked and reviled, I began yanking and pulling their sucker-like mouths from her skin. Yet no matter how many I removed, more seemed to appear out of nowhere. Each of the slimy slugs sucked and slurped upon my mother, her skin shriveling around their mouths. Where did they all come from? I thought. But as I started snatching them from her, I got my answer. One of the bloated white things swelled from my mom's stomach, growing from her like a fat-filled boil before wriggling free from her. All of a sudden, the worming fat spawn stopped feeding and began wriggling away from her, dropping to the ground and slithering in unison, as if they were following an invisible road. I followed them to the back door, where they exited through the cat flap and journeyed outside. Stepping outside, I found the strange salesman standing there in his skeletal frame, wrapped in a tight-fitting black suit. "Desperation, there's nothing sweeter, is there?" The man grinned, his white, crooked teeth smiling like a hungry animal. I went to demand what he was doing in my back garden when it happened. He plucked up one of the white fat spawn and swallowed it, alive and wriggling. "Delicious," the man smiled. I asked what he was, and he took great delight in telling me. "I'm the hunger in all beasts. I'm the fowler of water, the whimper of the starving. I take all you have and rob the land," he declared. One by one, the wriggling white worms crawled onto the man, sinking into his skin and clothes. They became one with him, fed him even. The process caused him to let out a disturbing, orgasmic sound that gave me shivers. I demanded that he saved her, stop whatever he had started, but he refused. Instead, he just kept laughing to himself, entertained by my utter inability to do anything. "You're a clever kid. Your mom should have listened to you. Alas, I can't help you. I've got a prior engagement with my brothers," the man grinned. Then, out of the night, came striding a great black stallion. It was as emaciated as the salesman and had large, white, snooker ball eyes. This horse, this man, I knew who he was. I went to Sunday school. My mom demanded it. It was famine, the great hunger. My shock and bewilderment brought a smile to the gaunt fellow's face as he mounted his horse. I picked up a wooden fence post, but before I could move towards him, his head twisted around and froze me with his gaze. My stomach clenched up, my skin tightened, and my head spun inside its skull. "Hunger can't be fought, lad," he smirked, and with that I fell to the ground, exhausted and drained. I could do nothing to stop him as he rode off into the night. I never saw him again, and people just seemed to forget him. Even me and my mom couldn't recall the name he gave us when he entered our community center. The only thing he left behind, the only evidence of his presence, were the hungry. Mom, Ken, Mrs. Hodge from down the road, and the rest of the Weight Watchers bunch were all hospitalized with a case of deliberate starvation. I explained to the doctors that it was the pills and the man, but they didn't believe me. The weight continues to drop off my mom and continues to crawl away. To where the fat worms slither, I do not know. She's little more than a skeleton now, but my mom always looks to me every day with a wheezing smile and asks if she is still beautiful, and I always say the same thing. "Yeah, Mom, you look amazing," I'd whisper. So let this be a lesson. If a man offers to make you thin, do not trust him. Do not take that pill. You are perfect just the way you are.